That wasn't my idea either, Barry protested loudly, finding it imperative that his father didn't think he'd asked for either the ridiculous outfit or the ridiculous moniker. Frank looked between Dania and Barry, lips pinched. Well, if he didn't have a say in either the clothing or the name, is there anything that can be changed? Franklin, Dania said with disappointed reproach, this is a huge deal for Barry. I thought you were going to be encouraging. Mr. Anderson seemed to realize he wasn't fulfilling the fatherly role he'd been hauled in for. I'm sorry, Dane. I know I'm not always hip to fake culture, but if he didn't ask for this, and as his parents we didn't get any say in it, is it really something we just have to accept as part of his future now? Barry and Nick both watched their parents riveted. Barry felt enormously conflicted, standing there with kitchen air pressed against an unseemly amount of bare skin. On the one hand, there was nothing he wanted more, in that moment, than the ability to dial back this whole hideous morning. On the other hand, it didn't seem that easy from what his mother kept saying, and as much as it shocked Nick, he couldn't pretend that he couldn't feel his altered body shape and wings, and he couldn't pretend that Grape didn't feel like his name. Honey, Dania said very quietly, he's a fairy godmother now. There isn't just an off switch for that. Frank's eyes were narrow and frustrated as he looked over Barry again. He of course didn't know enough about magic or fairydom to question what Dania was saying, but it was clear that he wanted to. Barry gazed hopelessly at his feet, or at least he would have if they were easier to see. His chest and skirt obscured his high heels unless he bent over to look, but he stared dejectedly at the kitchen tile. Well, what do you want, Barry? Frank asked, seeming to force himself to look his oldest in the eye. The question caught Barry off guard. Very little of this seemed to revolve around what he wanted. He laughed mirthlessly. To go from 15 to 17 and not have today have happened? Dania gave him a lovingly concerned look, but he really considered it more. I think, in some ways, I don't want this to be possible. Or if it is possible, I want it to happen to someone else, not to me. But then, look at me, he sighed. All three of them did. Dania looking thoughtful, Frank looking troubled, and Nick looking confused. I meant that figuratively, Barry exclaimed. Don't actually look at... He sighed, putting his slender hand tiredly over his eyes. I just mean I can't pretend this isn't happening to me, even though I want to. I think that's very mature of you, hon. Dania came over to him and put an arm around his shoulders and wings. He noticed with more dismay than perhaps it should have caused him that if his shoes hadn't been enhancing his current height, his mom was probably taller than him again, a milestone he'd managed to pass up as a boy around Nick's age. I'm not trying to get in the way of something you want to do, Frank told him. Barry's eyes widened. I never said that! He ran his words back through his head, wondering if anything he'd said made it sound like he was accepting this role that magic seemed determined to give him. I meant it more like I seem to have contracted a serious illness and I don't want to pretend I haven't. Instant boob disorder? Nick wisecracked, causing Barry's flush to act up again. Barry, Dania chided, removing her arm from around him so she could look at him fully. You're making it sound like such a doom and gloom thing. You have magic now. Barry looked down at the wand in his hand, not really comprehending that it had magic in it besides what was out to ruin his life. She has a point, Frank shrugged. Most people would leap at the chance to have magical powers. Did they have to come bundled? Barry frowned bitterly. Here, have a chocolate sundae with a side of waterboarding. Dania seemed very offended by this analogy. Hyperbole, Barry! Sorry, Barry mumbled, realizing that it was probably a crass comparison. It was the first thing I thought of for something that'd be kind of nice to have, coupled with the last thing you'd ever want. Drama queen, Nick jabbed quietly. Well, that was a stab right in his misshapen chest. It seemed that Nick knew just how to hit him. He didn't want to be being overdramatic, especially not in a stupid, girly, high-maintenance diva way. Really, he just didn't want to be in the room anymore. Didn't want to have to deal with being looked at, prodded and poked, mocked or scolded anymore, when he'd never asked for this in the first place. Can I please change back? He begged, not meeting any of their eyes anymore. Dania frowned lovingly at him, stepping over to him again and giving him a hug. He grew rigid in her arms, his body feeling so alienly soft when squeezed. Honey, I know it doesn't make any sense to you right now, but I know magic. You wouldn't have this if it didn't go with who you are, okay? He didn't say anything, humiliated she was bringing up Fatum being befitting of him again in front of his dad. I know it doesn't feel like an honor or a special thing right now, she went on, but it is, truly, Baz. He sighed mournfully, and it was breathy and soft. He didn't even want to be honored or special in the first place. He just wanted to be Barry and be a guy. Was that too much to ask? She pulled out of the hug slightly to look him in the eye. Grape, she repeated firmly. He glanced over at his dad, observing the discomfort there when his fairy name was used. But then he looked obediently back at Danya's intense, caring expression. You're a fairy godmother. That's not going anywhere. But you're going to be a great one. And with each passing day it'll feel more like a part of who you are. Barry looked again at Nick and Frank, thinking how they already seemed to be struggling to see past his new feminine exterior. Was Danya right, and each day he'd adopt the mask more? That seemed like a horrifying thought, given the powder puff pin-up he'd been transformed into. But he knew she only wanted to help, and she was more comforting than anything else he had at his disposal at the moment. If I say okay, can I change back? He asked. Frank laughed at that, breaking a bit of the gravity in the air. Danya sighed exasperatedly, giving him an understanding smile, and releasing him from her hug. Yes, I think we're done for today. Barry exhaled in relief. He was going home soon. Maybe not forever, but it was something. Frank, you want to watch him power down? Danya asked with a smile. The initial power-up was pretty exciting. Sure, that's one word for it, Barry rolled his eyes. Honestly, hon, I'd really like to get back to work, Frank said a little desperately. Barry suspected his desire was much more about getting away from what was happening at home, rather than getting back to work. Still, Barry would really rather his dad not watch, if it was going to be anything like before. Of course, love, Danya nodded, although Barry wondered if she was secretly disappointed her husband wasn't more engaged and excited with her. He was like a purple circus act, after all, Barry thought sarcastically. What wasn't there to be excited about? But I'll be back this evening, in time for cake and ice cream, right, sport? Frank gave his firstborn an uncomfortable smile. Normal birthday activities seemed a world away, but Barry nodded, trying to smile back at him. Thank you again for coming home, sweetheart, Danya reassured Frank, going to him. I'm really glad you were here. Of course, Frank nodded, still serious. You guys needed me. He gave his wife a kiss, and then Nick was in range that Frank patted him fondly on the back. But there was a tense pause as he was divvying out affection and got to Barry in the lineup. His dad looked him up and down once more, and Barry felt his body language being jittery and nervous again. He was all too aware of the burstiness of his upper torso, and the swish of his hips, and the fragile look of his arms and legs. It was all wrong, and Frank was still looking at him like he didn't even know him. Baz? He seemed to be reminding himself it was Barry in there. Did you want a hug? Barry's eyes went wide, thinking that sounded like one of the only things that could make this moment more awkward than it already was. That's really okay, Dad, he replied instantly, voice high and vibratory. I'm good, thanks. Okay, Frank nodded quickly, looking relieved. Love you though, kiddo. That meant a lot, and Barry's lower lip trembled, wanting so badly to still be able to be the kind of son that was making his father proud. That seemed much more difficult today than yesterday. Love you too, Dad. Frank nodded again before heading back out to the garage, leaving Danya, Nick, and Barry to themselves again.